over to you, Diksha. You can start.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody, or good evening in India. Good evening, everybody. It's so lovely to see so many faces. So this session, as you know, is being run in collaboration with Indear and MAP. And we're very excited to have you here. Dr. Sweeney is going to talk about grief and the service provider. So before we do that, I just wanted to quickly intro Indear and allow Dr. Singh to intro MAP as well. So Indear is a collaboration of mental health providers that is seeking to basically provide training, support in India. We started because of the COVID-19 crisis, and we really wanted to jump in and help. And now we're expanding and collaborating, and we're really excited about our collaboration with MAP to provide trainings to the public on a variety of topics. And so today's session will be about grief. And after Dr. Singh talks about MAP, I'll briefly intro Dr. Sweeney as well. So Dr. Singh, why don't you introduce MAP as well, our wonderful partner?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Diksha. So MAP is Mental Action by People, is a registered NGO, aims to promote well-being and the quality of life of fellow men by proactive intervention in community mental health. So MAP is a growing platform for connecting people, network, organizations, for sharing resources, and for building knowledge-related mental health and psychosocial support, both in emergency setting and in the situation of chronic hardship. And we aspire to building and shaping good practice in support of people affected by difficult events and circumstances. So we regularly keep on organizing such academic feast for the young budding psychologists to promote mental health through effective, preventive, and promotional measures with the active participation of professionals as well as people interested in the field of mental health. So this event is also part of our cardinal agenda. So I welcome you all on the behalf of MAP, and now over to Diksha. Please continue the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Singh, MAP does amazing work, and we're so excited to be able to partner with you all. So yeah, I'll just briefly intro Nancy, and then she has her slides up. So Nancy is a semi-retired clinical psychologist with degrees from the Harvard University Graduate School of Education and Williams James College. So she's very celebrated and degreed, and we're very lucky to have her. Through decades of involvement in the field of psychology, Nancy has found immense value in connection, conversation, engagement with the most difficult aspects of being human. So the search for ways of making meaning in life is at the heart of Nancy's work. And the challenge of today, according to her, is to find a tragic optimism in the face of adversity, both for ourselves and the sake of future generations. Nancy, this isn't in her direct bio, but she does a lot of multicultural work. And she's a mentor to so many people and can talk to many different aspects of mental health. So we're very lucky to have her today. Today, she's going to talk about the impact of trauma and loss with a focus on the experiences of service providers during the COVID-19 pandemic. The notion of tragic optimism, which is based on the work of the concentration Holocaust camp survivor Viktor Frankl, will offer a possible perspective on spiritual survival and restoration of a sense of balance in the aftermath of extreme life circumstances. So she's like, this talk is speaking directly to what a lot of people have experienced post-COVID and the grief around that and how to help with that. But Nancy, go ahead, take it away, whatever I've missed. And we're so excited to have you and hear you speak.
So much. And I am really honored to be here today, to have been invited by MAP and by Indear to share with you some thoughts about what's going on in the world today and what caregivers and service providers have been up against. Thinking a lot about the situation in India, sharing some of my what I've seen in other countries as well. I was born and raised in the United States, but I recently moved to Mexico. I've been living here for 2 years now, and I've been seeing some commonality in what people are experiencing. So let's jump in and get started. I'm sharing with you my email here, because what I would like to do is to offer you some resources. So if you would like a list of resources and some of my references after the session is done, please send me an email here, drnancysweeney@gmail.com, and I will be happy to get back to you. And bear with me, I am not the most well-versed in the technology here, and I want to send a shout out to my technical support, Miss Summer Collins, who will be doing the third session on grief for this series, has been really helpful to me, and I may turn to her from time to time, as well as to Diksha for some support in bringing things up. Now, I do not see my notes, and I'm going to try to pull them up. Bear with me for just a moment. Let's see. Down in the, okay, open speaker notes. I think that should do it. Okay, here. So here we have my premise for today. My premise for today is basically care providers are juggling responsibilities under difficult circumstances. This has a tremendous impact on many levels, and yet human beings are capable of such resilience that it will be possible for many, if not most, to overcome the trauma of current circumstance once the worst of the crisis has passed. Establishing a new normal will be part of the healing process. And as we go through this, I'm right now remembering Urmi Chakrabarti's advice during her presentation on Saturday. Wonderful, but early on, she advised that we all kind of pay attention as we go through this difficult topic, pay attention to ourselves and what we need, including our breathing, our relaxation. I have my cup of herb tea here. And if you, as an audience member, would like to take a break, walk around, stretch at any time, please remember to give yourself permission to do that. And I actually have added a second section on rituals, funeral rituals and memorial rituals during the time of COVID. So I may just take a brief break at that point and people can stretch a little bit, because it can be very difficult to be observing all of these things. Okay, let's see. So a guide to our conversation. So this is showing up very small on my screen, bear with me. I'll share some thoughts on what grief is, the diverse experiences of grief, the way grief is experienced and managed, and the many complications for those who provide service during the pandemic. Part one is the grief brain, and part two is diversity in mourning. And a question, of course, an important question. Can we get through this? I will share some reflections on how to work through these fragile circumstances in a way that allows for, for future growth. And the goal is to find a way to restore your spirit in the face of tragedy. So with that introduction, let's see, my next slide will be, here we go. So how are we affected by grief and loss? Different reactions among different individuals and different reactions by one individual to different deaths. Whoops, sorry.
Nancy, may I interrupt for one
Please
brief
do.
moment for tech stuff? So the way that your screen is presenting right now is we are seeing your entire browser screen. If you can maximize that again and allow us to see the presentation, that will keep us from having the speaker notes blocking part of the screen.
Ah, okay, so you're seeing the speaker notes as well.
As a gray box when you were bringing it up.
Ah, okay, thank you. How is this? Is this, no?
Nancy, are your speaker notes up now still?
They are now up.
Okay, we
What-
can't, yeah, it's fine now. We don't see anything right now, but before, a couple minutes ago, we could see a couple gray boxes, but now it's okay.
For letting me know. That's that's the kind of thing I need to know as I'm going through this. And I have to say, one of the most wonderful things about doing this presentation is being able to interact and engage with young people in the field who know the technology far better than I do. So I appreciate your patience. So the grief brain, part one. In an article entitled "The Fog of Grief: A science journalist named April Reese described the cognitive fog she experienced at the death of her father. For her, it was a kind of disorientation and this feeling that she couldn't breathe. She felt constant fatigue and forgetfulness. And she called this the grief brain when talking to her friends. That feeling of fuzzy thinking, of being unable to focus and always being tired, no matter how much she slept. And, we know that each grief is different. Each person experiences this differently. Some of the responses might include feeling really dispirited and lethargic. Some people might feel agitated, irritable, easily angered. Some people might feel very unmotivated and disorganized. They might have heightened sensitivity and reactivity. They might find noise hard to tolerate. And some people might shut down and not feel anything at all. They might not want to eat or participate in activities. So there's a real range here in terms of how people experience grief. In addition to the differences between individuals, there are differences within each individual in the face of different losses. I would like to share a little bit of my personal history. Something that really got me started thinking a lot about grief and how it's managed. Several years ago, I went through a period of about 4 years when I lost my father, my sister, my niece, and my dog. And it was really a challenge. And I really had to think in terms of how to get through this while holding my patients as well, not letting it interfere with the work, and of course, trying to figure out what to do with it myself. So one thing, first of all, that I learned is that every death is different. Every death is different. You might feel completely thrown by the unexpected loss of a young relative, or you might have a sense of peace at the death of an elderly loved one who has been suffering. And I was reading the work of a neurologist, very interesting. Her name is Schulman. And following the death of her husband from cancer, Dr. Schulman wrote a book called Before and After Loss. She reported that our experience of loss is personal and intimate. It doesn't lend itself well to generalization. It's as unique as we are. However, I think there are some common underpinnings to the way that we as human beings experience grief. And in looking at the common underpinnings, I'm going to turn to the field of neuroscience. When we look at the neuroscience of grief, there are some commonalities. Scientists have been able to use functional MRIs and CAT scans to look at the way the brain functions and the way it changes during, at least initially in the acute stages. And some of their preliminary findings are that the amygdala or fear center, if you look at this slide, you can see there's the two parts of the brain. This is, of course, a vastly oversimplified view of the brain, but it's useful for our purposes. The red center, the limbic system, is the seat of what some people consider the primitive brain. It includes the amygdala, the hippocampus, so all of these parts of the brain that manage emotion, memory processing. These are the parts that are very affected by grief. The frontal lobe, which of course is the part of us that, makes the executive decisions and keeps us functioning day to day and doing logical things and making plan. As the brain enters a state of grief, the functioning of the red system, the limbic system, is activated and heightened, and the frontal lobe, the executive functioning, is diminished. Part of this, they believe, every loss that we have, every serious loss, and not just of a person, loss can mean a lot of things, but it is experienced by our brain neurologically as a threat. So the amygdala or the fear center is heightened. The brain is flooded with stress chemicals like cortisol, and at the same time, the executive functioning is diminished. As Dr. Schulman described, areas involved in emotion and memory work overtime, and they gatekeep which emotions and memories get through. And these brain changes correlate with that sense of disorganization, sadness, overwhelm, fatigue, all of these things that people experience in acute grief. But it is also the way the brain is trying to protect us from experiencing too much awareness too quickly. So what we have during acute grief is physical and emotional dysregulation. That's a key word here. There's heightened activation of the fear center, changes in immune functioning, even increased inflammatory processes. And for a long time, researchers have been aware of what they call the broken heart syndrome, in which when somebody loses a long-term spouse, they have an increased risk of mortality, especially due to cardiac problems over the initial 6 months after the loss. So it has a really profound effect on us as a whole being. And what we're seeing nowadays is care and service providers are repeatedly exposed to grief and to grief, their own and that of others. And this can create a chronic sense of internal dysregulation, which is both physical and emotional. So again, this heightens for us the importance of finding some form of self-care, partly to manage the physical manifestations. And I know Summer Collins in the next episode is going to be sharing some wonderful ideas about that. And sources of grief during the pandemic, as I said, of course, if you've lost a loved one or loved ones, you're very aware of the grief. But we also are experiencing the loss of the way things used to be, the loss of a normal social routine, and the loss for many people of security, particularly income. It might be losing health. And especially for teenagers, I think that I've really been aware with some of my nieces and nephews that the loss of their plans. I have a niece who had a scholarship that she wasn't able to attend because of the quarantine. In Mexico, and I'm imagining it's likely in India as well, there are many people who are part of what they call the informal economy, where they make their living selling fruit door to door, or perhaps selling to people who stoplight. And when they are unable to leave the house in order to work, they have no income. And so this is another source of stress added to all of the threat that grief imposes. All right, let's see. So, and now for healthcare providers in particular, there's a complication. And this is what I've been referring to. The external systems are dysregulated, just as service providers are managing their own internal dysregulation. And I think this is what makes the pandemic different from other situations of loss. And in particular, for healthcare workers and frontline workers who have to continue to function during the pandemic, the external dysregulation is yet another, it's a whole nother variable. It's the atmosphere in which we live. So during the time of COVID, what I've seen in news reports and heard from, I have family members who are care providers in the United States. There are disruptions in hospitals and the healthcare system in many places. And we're all aware of how excruciatingly painful that can be. Some people may be very disappointed in the government response in many places. And certainly I've seen that in every place I've looked, in the United States, in Mexico, the reports from India, from many countries. The governments have not really been poised to manage this particularly well. Social norms are disrupted as we're told to stay at home, many of us, or to, not. I know in Mexico, people have felt very sad because Mexico is a very open culture. You greet people with hugs and kisses, and not being able to do that has been felt acutely by many of us. The rituals for managing grief have been disrupted, and the sources of income. And so I'd like to just pause for a moment and invite you to think about, kind of what are the disruptions that you've been up against in the systems that you rely on. And that can be anything at all that you've experienced. And I'm going to invite you to share those. You can raise your hand if you want, or put it in the comments, because I really want to hear your firsthand account of what you've been dealing with. So continue as we go along, and I'd really like to invite you to add comments and questions as well as I continue with my slides. And I think Diksha will be able to let me know the things that people bring up. So,
Nancy, I just have a quick question. I just want technology. Are you intending to be on the grief brain slide right now? Part one,
no.
The grief brain.
Is that where I am? Okay.
That's all we see right now.
That's all you've seen. Okay, so let's see. Bear with me a moment. Let's see. No.
And yes, please, everybody. I know this is kind of odd, but please feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go along.
Put your question in the chat. There is a green button that says resume share. Now let me see if it's resuming. It says my screen sharing is paused. Okay. Now what do you see? I can't tell.
We still just see the grief brain.
The grief brain, you're still on that. Okay, so you actually didn't get my slide of the brain. Pardon me. I see we have somebody raising a hand. So how do we call on that person?
Yeah, so we can just speak up. Krishnan, do you want to say your question, or do you want me to read it out? Whatever you think.
Yeah. The question I have not put, so I would like to ask. Actually, I had a personal experience. See, I lost my mom when I was 1.5 years old, and in the Indian tradition, the kids are not taken to the graveyard or crematory place. So the grief was not taken place.
Yes.
I felt this was not experienced, and I have not discharged my grief until I was 52. So how does it, I mean, you know, there will be lots of, I felt that lots of insecurity I started feeling. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
I'm having a little bit of trouble. The sound is breaking up a bit, but go ahead.
Okay. So I felt that there was a sense of insecurity throughout my life.
Yes.
Until 52, 53 years old. Okay. So then when I got into the field, then, you know, then I know there is a process. Then, you know, I started hunting for. So how does this can be identified? Where the grief is not taken place, number one. The second question also, I will say, I don't want to disturb coming again and telling you. So another question was how this negative emotions like sadness or fear or these emotions, how the brain accepts. Because, you know, I read something about Avi Adhikari's lab, some article I read. He is in UCLA. So I read something, but, you know, there was the detail I couldn't read in full. So I don't have full knowledge about it. So how brain accepts these negative emotions? These are the two questions, Nancy.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. And these are really good. I mean, one of the things you're highlighting is the way in which every grief is different, and grief might in fact be deferred sometimes for years. And then another loss that comes up might evoke that. It's very interesting because in the United States, they found with World War II veterans, some of them did not experience the symptoms of grief and PTSD until they were in their 70s. So the brain has a way of protecting us from being exposed to too much all at once. And I think that one of the things we see is that, yes, it really can be something that's deferred for years and then is evoked in the face of another grief. And And I'm sorry, the second part is about negative emotions. And can you repeat the second question?
Yeah, this how does the brain accept this negative emotions? I read some article from Avi's lab, who is a professor in UCLA, but I couldn't get the full article to read it. So I'm not sure whether I'm sure because you are there, you may be knowing about it. So I don't know. So I just wanted to know how the brain accepts these negative emotions.
An excellent question. I don't know the research you're referring to, but certainly, this is the brain accepts negative emotions with great difficulty. And I think although they're necessary in a part of restructuring ourselves, reformulating our lives, after grief, we have to sooner or later manage the negative feelings of loss. Everybody's brain is a little different too. Some people are going to feel them extremely acutely and other people are not. And so there's no formula for how you feel. There's nothing that says you have to feel X amount of sadness or X amount of irritability. It really depends on your own individual brain function and the interaction between the thinking and feeling brain for each individual. So let's see, I'm going to try to, if I can get some tech support here. I see my screen sharing is still paused, and although I'm pressing resume share, it's not resuming. I'm not sure how to proceed.
Nancy, do you want to send your slides over to me and I can just click through them for you? And
that would be beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Diksha.
And one more thing, Nancy, I used to view lots of videos of John Bradshaw.
Yes. Yes, I know him. Yeah.
So that was it is very unfortunate that he passed away a few years ago, very recently. So in fact, I thought I could get him like you. I thought I would get him online here, something like that. So yes, which is a missed chance. But I felt that is really I think that was the one which had made some healing for me.
And I think one of the points I want to make today is that we all do need to recognize and identify the people who are important, the people who provide us some spiritual guidance in any form, and, kind of to see how that will help us through this. So let me see. I'm not sure, Diksha, how do I send my slides over to you?
Oh, someone sent them to me. Can you see them?
Yes, we can see them.
Okay, let's see here.
We can see them.
I see. All right. Very good. So
begin once again so that we can see all of them.
So which one, Nancy, should I, are you getting a gray box on the screen or are the slides clear? You can see them.
let me see.
It's clear. It's clear.
It's clear.
Okay.
It's clear, Diksha.
Okay. So then
I'm not seeing them now. So, oh my goodness. Yeah.
Just pull up the full Zoom window and then you should see them. Just not just our bar of faces. Pull up the full Zoom window.
Okay. Let me see here.
And meanwhile, I'll click through the slides for people.
Okay, good. So what slide are you on now? Am I seeing them?
I'm on the complicated grief work.
Let's see. I'm not sure I'm on the same page. Let me see here. Whoops, hold on. Zoom, here we go. Okay. I am not seeing this. Okay. Are you at the collision of fear and grief?
No, I'm currently at a guide to our conversation.
A guide to our conversation. Okay. Okay. So part one. Okay. And next slide. Okay. This is what I was referring to earlier with the parts of the brain that are affected. And moving on to the next one. Okay. Acute grief. And moving on to the next one. Okay, good. Let's pause here. I'm not going to have my notes in front of me, I don't think, but I am going to just work off what I have here. So, talking to medical caregivers, I've really been struck by this particular squeeze that they're in emotionally, because just as a time when they're expected to overperform, there are these crazy demands being made, and a lot of times they're not being given the resources that they need to do their job properly. So what I've heard is that they feel a loss of a sense of agency at the same time that they feel responsible for caring for extremely ill patients. There might be a distraction due to the lack of personal protective equipment. I remember seeing a photograph from New York City, a hospital in which the nursing assistants had cut an opening in the top of garbage bags to pull over themselves to try to protect themselves from the virus. And if that doesn't exemplify, what it would feel like, to literally be working in a garbage bag, it doesn't tend to make people feel valued. Another complication is distraction that is caused by the personal protective equipment. It adds a layer of difficulty to everything that people do. I have another sister who works in a clinic in East Boston, and she was saying, to perform surgery, it's really difficult because she has to wear glasses to see for surgery. And when she has them on underneath all this personal protective equipment, they are fogging up and she can't just reach in and wipe them off. So there's this extra layer of complication that makes everything extra difficult. Caregivers often have a fear of carrying the virus home to family. And this might lead them to isolate from their family, to not be in the home with their children. I know some caregivers in many places have been staying in hotels in order not to expose their children. So just at a time when everyone needs emotional support the most, that they have least access. With the onslaught of very sick patients and the dysregulation in the environment where there's chaos, when nothing is working the way it should, people are sometimes left with a sense of hopelessness. They might feel de-skilled or ineffective and have a sense of futility due to the severity of illness and the numbers of deaths. People might feel guilt that they can't do more. They might experience a sense of damage to their self-esteem and professional competence. And the loss of a sense of meaning in the work. When you've gone into this work in order to help people and you don't have the means to do that, and your efforts are unacknowledged and unappreciated, I think it's very difficult to sustain that sense of meaning that's so important to you. And I think a lot of these things are fundamental to the times we live in. It's funny, as I was struggling to put all of this together, and I'm writing up this list, helplessness, guilt, all of this, and realizing even as I was writing about these things, I was experiencing some of it, feeling that I wish I could do more for all of you in India. I wish I could make it go away, this kind of very primitive things, and recognizing that what I can do is keep you company and let you know that we see you, we're paying attention, and we want to offer our support and accompany you along the way. So next slide. Oh, okay, so we talked a little bit about this already, the external systems that are dysregulated, just as service providers are managing internal dysregulation. So Diksha, the next slide, please. Okay, so this collision of fear and grief, it's a real acute distress that most people feel. And what this does is it really heightens volatility in interpersonal interactions. And this shows up in many places as attacks on caregivers, unfortunately. Here in my adopted country, in the city where I live in Merida, we've had a number of instances of bleach being thrown on doctors, of nurses being thrown off buses when they leave the hospital at the end of the day. They actually had to set up a separate bus system to take the nurses home at night because the population would not allow them on the buses. And in some villages outside of Merida, the local people have put they've put boulders and tree limbs across the road going into their village in order to try to keep themselves safe. So this, I think, it really indicates just how frightening all of this is for people and how difficult it is for them to kind of maintain any sense of normalcy. So at the same time that everybody's feeling this, caregivers have this additional burden of responsibility, as the population at times expects somehow that they will fix it. They're asked to overperform just when things are the hardest, and they have less institutional support. This means that caregivers end up being the target of blaming, confrontation, and aggression because the population is really having a hard time managing their own fear and grief. In some sense, I've thought this for a long time that in a crisis, we almost expect doctors, nurses, healthcare providers to be pseudo parents, to be able to step in and make everything okay and to have all the answers. And as caregivers, we might also fall prey to that ourselves, wishing that we did have all the answers and wishing that we could fix it all. So everyone has to manage the reality of the situation somehow. And blaming becomes a real issue. I think when people are scared, they want to know who's at fault. And that, unfortunately, is not a very useful construction of the issue. So next slide, Disha. Okay, so unabated over time. This is what leads to rage, despair, sadness, becoming numb, apathetic, and cynical, numbing out with alcohol. Hello? Somebody needs numbing out with alcohol or drugs, losing the sense of the future, a sense of disorientation as the world changes, and sadly, it can even lead to depression and suicidality. So all of this, it's important to acknowledge this reality. We can't escape it. It's there every day. But this is not where the story ends. And where do we go from here? So if we can have the next slide. Okay, the case for a tragic optimism. Now, this is a very, very profound concept, and it's a little bit different than positive thinking. Tragic optimism is a term that was coined by the Austrian psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who died in 1997. He was a concentration camp survivor. And, he and his family, he'd been teaching in a neurology department in one of the last hospitals in Austria that Jewish professionals during World War II. And in 1942, he and his entire family were taken to a concentration camp where he experienced horrific loss and the kinds of conditions that we know existed then in these camps. His father died of pneumonia. His mother and his brother were gassed. His young wife, he had just married 9 months before they were taken into the camps. His young wife died of typhus. And yet somehow he survived and came out of this to publish in 1946 a book about optimism. And, when I was going through a crisis in my own life and I heard about him, I thought, oh, this is somebody I have to listen to. If he can come up with optimism after going through everything that he went through, then it's really worth figuring out how did he accomplish that? So next slide, please. Optimism in the face of tragedy in spite of the tragic triad of pain, guilt, and death. So this is the definition that Viktor Frankl gives of tragic optimism. Next slide, please. This is a quote from the book. He had been going through a very hard time and wasn't sure what was going to happen to him. Many of his comrades in the camp were dying. And he said, a bit later, I remember it seemed to me that I would die in the near future. In this critical situation, however, my concern was different than most of my comrades. Their question is, will we survive the camp? For if we do not, all this suffering has no meaning. The question which beset me, however, was, has all this suffering, this dying around us, a meaning? For if not, then ultimately there is no meaning to survival. For a life whose meaning depends on happenstance, such as whether one escapes or not, ultimately would not be worth living at all. Now, this is, I find, a very interesting passage, because I think what he is suggesting is that the meaning of life cannot be dependent upon having a good outcome. What this implies is that the meaning of life is inherent in life itself, in every experience of life. Even a life that is not successful in the eyes of the world, where you do not achieve the goals that you wish you could achieve, every life has meaning. Next slide, please. The meaning of life always changes, but it never ceases to be. And this is, again, this is Viktor Frankl. We can discover this meaning in life in 3 different ways. First, by creating a work or a deed. Second, by experiencing something or encountering someone. And third, by the attitude we take towards unavoidable suffering. Now, what he's referring to here in the first part, creating a work or a deed, he's referring to creativity and the profound meaning that can be found in, for example, creating a work of art or becoming a musician, being able to share something creative with the world, whether it's professional or amateur, doesn't matter. But the experience of creating is what matters and can really provide an important source of meaning. Number 2, when he talks about experiencing something or encountering someone, he's talking about encountering on a very deep level. He's talking about loving another person so profoundly that you are really seeing who they are with all of their good and bad points and finding a way to meet them there and to encourage their best self. He talks as well about seeing the potential in other people and helping them achieve that potential is a profound form of love. Sometimes you might see potential they're not even aware of. And the third part, he talks about the attitude we take towards unavoidable suffering. And this is really an incredibly important piece of his experience and his work, because a certain amount of suffering is unavoidable in life. And there are times in life, obviously, when it becomes quite overwhelming. And how we look at this matters. He does distinguish, this is not a masochistic sort of thing. He says that he says that avoidable suffering is not to be embraced. It's to be rejected. And I think this is a really important piece of it for us, is to think what is avoidable and what is unavoidable in the suffering. Next slide, please. So he came out of the camps with this sense of things. We must never forget that we may also find meaning in life, even when confronted with a hopeless situation, when facing a fate that cannot be changed. For what then matters is to bear witness to the uniquely human potential at its best, which is to transform a personal tragedy into a triumph, to turn one's predicament into a human achievement. When we are no longer able to change a situation, for example, think of an incurable disease such as inoperable cancer, we are then challenged to change ourselves. And this is an incredible challenge that he lays out. And this is, I think, it ties in with ideas such as radical acceptance. I don't know if people are familiar with radical acceptance, but it really refers to kind of the reality of life as we live it, to take it life on life's terms, to set our ego aside, so to speak, and to really say, what can I do with the circumstances that I've given? And I think it's a tall order when you're in the midst of grief. I think the acute phase is to pass, but as we move through grief into a new phase, how we construct that story of our lives, how we construct the story of what we've been through is incredibly important. And we are the author of the story of our lives. How the story we tell about the things we've been through. Maybe we can't change our circumstances, but we can change our story. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we are. We've come to the end of part 2. And I do want to hear from people. I want to hear some of the comments and questions that are coming up.
Hello, ma'am. Let me ask a question.
Go ahead.
You said I'm Dr. Sebin Eskotaram. I'm a psychologist from Kerala, India. And I have a question that you said that there are so many ways to handle the situation. And what are the ways that we can adopt to handle such?
Can you repeat the last part? What are the ways that we can?
Okay, you said that there are so many ways to handle the situation. Maybe a particular crisis situation or a grief situation. Can you just make it clear that which are the ways that we can adopt to handle such situation or face such situation?
Yeah, I think what I'm, it's a very good point, because what I'm talking about here is a kind of, I'm offering a particular perspective rather than advice. And there are a lot of good strategies, I think, that we can use to manage the internal dysregulation. I think that's the first piece of it to get through this, is find ways that work for each of us to manage that internal state of dysregulation. For people who feel overwhelmingly sad or agitated or anxious, Summer Collins is actually going to be offering some strategies in the third part of the grief series that I think will be very useful, practical strategies. And you may already know some of them. I'm sure many of you could create an entire list of strategies that you use. Things like spiritual practices, yoga. For me, I love poetry, musicians, art. I have a lot of friends who are artists who are drawing and painting their responses to what's happening in the world. And sometimes that works when words don't. But basically, the goal is to find a way to manage that internal dysregulation so that you can then start to find a way to go forward. And I think in terms of creating a perspective situation right now, one of the things to remember is that we don't know what the answer ultimately will be. And when we try to project into the future based sometimes on where we're at right now, if we're in a very bleak place, the only thing we're going to project is negative. It's going to feel like, oh, a dead-end street, or everything's falling apart, or things will never be better. And in fact, we don't know where all of this is going to go. And in fact, there are possibilities for healing and improvement that we are not aware of yet, that will just be emerging. And that's why I think it's also really, really important to look at the people who inspire you, to look at, as I look at Viktor Frankl and some of the other people, both people I know personally and people I respect and admire, spiritual leaders that I followed in my own life, we can really start to use those teachings to construct a better future for ourselves, even as we are working to manage our own internal dysregulation. So I hope that speaks to some of what you were wondering.
Yes, it was very effective to get the correct idea. Thank you.
Thank you. So somebody has their hand raised?
I would like to add something.
Yes, please.
Yeah, the Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore from India, he also went through a lot of turmoil in his life, but each piece of experience, a bad experience in his life, actually, he turned it into poetry, songs, literature, and went on to get the Nobel Prize in Literature from India in 1912. So I think that, and as you said, performing art therapy is the way forward, where we can look forward to spiritual experiences as well as look into like the blind window within ourselves, which we have talents to explore them, and spiritual people who can guide us the way during grief-stricken times.
That's beautiful. Yes, thank you for that. And you know what I'm going to invite you and everyone else to do is write down in the comments some things that work for you, some leaders who inspire you, poetry. If you write those things in the comments, what I would like to do after we're done today is compile a list of people that you find inspiring and places that you turn for inspiration. And again, I'll show my email address at the end as well. And you can then email me and I will send you a list. I will compile that list for everyone so we can share these resources. So thank you so much. That's an excellent example. Other comments?
Good evening, ma'am. Myself, Kavita. I would like to share some personal experiences with you and would like to get some guidance. I am right now 40 years old and my father is around 70 years old. I lost my mother recently in April. Now, since lot of time has gone, we are able to adjust ourselves in different activities, but it is very difficult for my father to adjust. Although I am also basically a psychology teacher only, so all theoretical knowledge, whatever as you were telling about Viktor Frankl, I had shared different experiences with my father, but nothing is working out. He is not taking interest in any activity I am telling him to do. So
Yes.
I am attending these workshops in order to weigh in whichever way I could help him, because it's very painful. Although the loss of mother also has affected me a lot, but the person who is in front and is in pain is very painful.
And
What
my
type of whatever we had discussed till now, I was hearing very patiently, but nothing is working. Like I could, if I suggest him any entertaining activity, he just tells me that you should not talk about all this. Like I tell him that he is having his granddaughters, so he can take him for the walk, which he used to take previously. But now he is refusing. I hope you got it now, ma'am. Please help me out.
You have my condolences, my deepest condolences for the loss of your mother and the situation in which your father is shut down, it sounds like. And, you know, I'm not sure what the possibilities are for you. If this were a client I were seeing in the United States, I would be get a psychiatrist to evaluate him for depression, because grief can lead into depression at times. And when people shut down and really are not able to accept the help that's offered, that is oftentimes a sign of depression. And, you know, this is a case where I'd be thinking, I wonder if a medication could help him feel this, you know, experience this in a way that he could reach out to other people again. Because it sounds like you're suggesting all the right things. And certainly you hope that grandkids usually can cheer someone up, you know, they can pull them sometimes out of their grief or their sadness. But, you know, it does sound like if there's a possibility of an evaluation by a psychiatrist, that would be the first thing that crosses my mind. But I also hear for you, it must be incredibly difficult to be working so hard to try to help him and not finding anything that works. And then we go back to that feeling of helplessness that one has. And how do you kind of learn to live with the things that you can't change, even when they feel so very intolerable? And I think that's quite a dilemma. But I hope you have a lot of support. I hope you have friends that you can take this to as well.
Yes, ma'am, I'll try my level best, but nothing is working actually. That's why. Okay, thank you.
Yes, well, I think it's called comfort really when you recognize that sometimes the only comfort you have is knowing that you are trying your best. And I think you need to give yourself credit for that because, you know, you can't force other people to take care of themselves. I've often said to clients, the only person I can't protect a patient from is themselves. And certainly for someone who is very shut down and possibly depressed, I think it can be very difficult and frustrating. But I want to make sure you give yourself credit for doing your best and for offering these opportunities because that matters.
Thank you, ma'am, for your words. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
You're very
Let's
welcome.
see. Let's see. Actually, you know, in India, there is a stigma regarding these mental disorders also. So no
Yeah,
one is interested in visiting this. No
yeah.
one is interested in opting for psychology. I am facing another issue with my students to help them to encourage to take up the subject.
Yes, yes. So you're juggling a lot. Yeah. And I think it's really, I mean, it took a long time, even in the United States. And certainly there are older generation in the United States who don't buy into, you know, they don't believe in kind of turning to somebody like a psychiatrist in a situation like this. And again, I think that all you can do is do your best. And when I used to teach medical residents, I would say, do your best and then stop. You know, once you've done your best, take a deep breath and wait and see if another possibility emerges down the road. You know, you can pay attention to a person for changes in their mood and see which direction they're going in and see when they might be more open to hearing you. And I know it's not a very satisfying answer, but I think this really is the best we can do in a situation like this.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
For giving so much time also of yours.
That's all right. I will wish you luck in all of this. So do we have more comments? Let's see.
We have one more. We have another question from one of our participants. If you want to speak, you can, but if not, I'll just read out your question. This participant wants to ask about people who are able to channelize their toxic or bad energy into something productive. And sometimes they're able to do better when they're going through something, but this person feels like, you know, they just can't channel their sad or bad energy, quote unquote bad, into something productive. They just stop functioning. It affects their life, their studies. So what happens if you can't channel your sadness into something that's productive or creative, is this question.
Yeah, excellent question. And even as I was, you know, kind of going over the work from Viktor Frankl, I was thinking, wow, he's got a thinking brain that kept on working through his whole experience, you know, and this is where there are differences in people. When you think about the emotional brain and the thinking, for most of us, the emotional brain can become quite overwhelming when we're immersed in sadness. And I think for people like Viktor Frankl and other spiritual guides, they are able to think and feel. And in that way, they can mediate for the rest of us, kind of like, here is the way through this. You know, sometimes they can like shine a flashlight on the path through this. But I think sometimes when you're feeling quite overwhelmed with sadness, you can't expect yourself to transform it immediately. You know, sometimes you have to give yourself a lot of time and be very gentle with yourself when you are experiencing this overwhelming sadness, because it can take, you know, from my experience, I've been around for a while now, and it can take even years to really come through this and to find your way out the other side, or to construct a path of your own through this wilderness of grief. And so be very gentle and be very patient. And I think, again, one of my experiences in my life after going through a time of crisis was that things actually turned out far better than I ever would have anticipated. And I think that this is where having the right kind of guidance as you're going through something so that you can continue to be open to the possibility of things getting better. That's really important. And sometimes we need our family and friends to remind us of this when we forget. And I think this is where the social part of things is so important. But it's very difficult right now. And I want everyone to really give themselves a lot of credit, because this is a monumental time of chaos. And we're missing a lot of the things that ordinarily we would use to see ourselves through. And that has an impact. And with that, I think, Diksha, we can go to the next slide and go into, I want to do a brief review of some of the rituals of mourning.
Yeah, and we just have one more question before that, Nancy, and I think that this will also really work, segue well into the slides, and maybe the slides will cover this. But we have a question about, after losing a loved one, if, we feel the memories of the loved one after long periods of time, is that normal? Does a person need grief counseling if they still have vivid memories of a loved one after they've passed? And this happens 1 or 2 times a week that these vivid memories come up. Is this normal?
I don't use the word normal too much because I don't think it's useful. And as a psychologist, I didn't really believe in normal. What I thought about was, where is this taking you? I hope I will always remember vividly my sister, my father, my niece, even my little dog. I hope I always remember them. And people often have very dreams that feel like a visitation, and I had a dream that I really believe was a visitation from my father. And as long as you are able to kind of take care of yourself while you're experiencing the vivid memories, if you're able to eat and you're able to sleep and you're able to, kind of carry on your day, then that is absolutely normal for you. And I think you are entitled to your own unique experience of this. But for myself, I would never want to forget, the memories of the people in my life, because they will always be a part of my internal landscape. And some people say that the person dies, but the relationship doesn't. The relationship continues to go on because the people we love are so much a part of our own internal structure. So yeah, I think it's a matter of, being able to function, being able to eat and sleep primarily. If you're able to do those things, then you don't have to worry about the rest of it.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you. Let me share the slides now. Let me present so everyone can see.
Okay, let's see here. So I just wanted to do a very quick review. I know we don't have a whole lot of time left, but some diversity in mourning and acknowledging that one of the things that's been disrupted in many places, and certainly in India, as we've seen in the rest of the world, we've been very aware of how disrupted things have been in India. But there are many ways of saying goodbye to someone. And one of my goals in thinking about how diverse these mourning rituals are, and I would like you to take away with you a notion that in the absence of what we would usually do to say goodbye to a person, you can think creatively about private rituals. So I'll say more of that later, but if we can have the next slide. Thanks, Diksha. So here is and again, I'm going to be trying to remember as best I can. I don't have my notes in front of me, but this is a funeral service in New Orleans. And you may have heard of these jazz funeral services. And in New Orleans, they have jazz bands marching down the street, accompanying the coffin to the cemetery site. And they play a very sad, mournful tune on the way to the cemetery. And as they leave the cemetery, play much louder, livelier, joyful music as a celebration of the person's life. Next slide, please. This is a cemetery. as I recall, this is from Bali, they construct a beautiful ox out of wood that accompanies the deceased person as they carry them to the gravesite. And then this is a part of the funeral pyre that they used to buy. So next slide, please. This is a funeral in Huntington Beach, California, among the surfers. They have started this new tradition of scattering the ashes of one of their companions who has died in the center of, as you can see, they all go out to the ocean on their surfboards. And this is the ritual they have created that has special meaning for them. Next slide, please. This is from South Africa. And in these funeral services, people sing and dance as a way of honoring the person who is gone. Next slide, please. And this is from an area in Indonesia, and the name escapes me right at the moment, but this is known to be one of the most elaborate and extended funeral services in the world. They will take months getting ready for the funeral, creating the beautiful red and gold coffin. And the structure over the coffin is the shape of an Indonesian house in their particular area. And so they will take months getting ready, and the funeral itself will go on for days. Next slide, please. Included some slides from India. And as you can see, here is the beginning of a funeral ritual. Next slide, please. This is a slide, a photo of a funeral in South India, in one of the tribes in South India. And I'm sorry, the name escapes me, but it is an example. I think India is such a rich and diverse land, and there are many different cultures that, I think there's a lot of real diversity there. So next slide, please. This is an imam at a Muslim funeral service. And the next slide is a Hindu service. And I'm sure there are many other in India as well. There are many Christian services. And so we see there's a real diversity. People have constructed these kinds of ceremonies and rituals over the centuries as a way of holding themselves together and coming together as a community at a time of grief. And they really are missed when they are not available. This is another thing that makes it just that much harder to get past the grief when you don't have the comfort of these rituals. Next slide, please. So, as I was saying, is what we know about the disorganizing effects of grief, we can infer something about the importance of funeral rites and rituals in providing and organizing a structure, people coming together in community when they are experiencing the disorientation and dysregulation of grief. So don't be surprised if, something else came up. Don't be surprised if you find it a little bit more difficult in these times, even more difficult, much more difficult, to come to terms with saying goodbye to a loved one. So, okay. So I think going down to the next slide, we probably, there. Okay, now, before you click it on, I would like to share with you a little bit of the yearly Day of the Dead in Mexico, which I find fascinating. As I said, since I'd been dealing with a lot of losses of my own, I was really, really fascinated by the Mexican relationship to death. And I thought I would just share with you some of the things that are seen here. It's a little bit different in the Yucatan. We have a ceremony every year that lasts for 3 days. That's called Hanal Pishan, which is Food of the Dead. And these slides are from 2019, since, as experienced in most places, we were unable to have this ceremony last year because of COVID quarantine. But this is a very brief video. If you want to get that started, Diksha, a very brief taste of Hanal Pishan. Can you turn on the sound? There. Okay. I guess we're not getting the sound, are we? That's all right. What you can see here are a number of people in the streets, and many people have death masks on. They will have faces to look like skulls. And in front of the houses, they will set up tables as altars. And on the altars, they will have pictures of their loved ones. And they will have food for the dead, because they believe on this day, they can invite their lost loved ones to come and visit them, and they can bring them back by putting out their favorite foods and perhaps their favorite and that sort of thing. So you can see this scene here, and this goes on for 3 or 4 miles. The streets are just full of people. Next slide, please. If we can move on to the next one. There we go. Here's an example of an altar with a number of, they put out pictures of their lost loved ones and their favorite foods. Next slide, please. Here's another altar you can see in front of this jaguar mural. She has put out pictures of her family members who are gone, along with the foods and things that remind her of them. Next slide, please. And a lot of people paint their faces and wear their traditional Mayan huipiles, the dress that they wear with the embroidery on. Here's an entire family. They're out memorializing the dead. So the next slide. And as you can see from these pictures, the painting is really elaborate and unique and beautiful for many people. It's a very unique relationship, I think, that Mexicans have with death. So next slide, please.
We had a comment in the chat. In India as well, there's a lot of rituals, and someone just said they've been doing a ritual for the last 54 years for their family member.
That's wonderful. Yeah, yeah. I want to make sure to have some time to look at that. So let's really click through quickly through the rest of, here's another example of people adorning themselves for the Day of the Dead, Hanal Pishan. And the next slide is, I forgot, oh, one of my favorites. This little man has his guayabera, his very fancy white outfit, and he's standing proudly in front of his family's altar. Next slide, please. This is a different kind of figure here. The Katrinas with the fancy hats are a reminder that no matter how wealthy and blessed we are, death will come for us all. The next slide is a very poignant scene, a little girl sitting in front of a picture of a lost loved one and seeing how somber she was. I really wondered what the story was for her. And the next slide, this is a good example of how the children are used to thinking about death. And these little rascals, I couldn't get the one on the right to even sit still long enough to take his picture, but they're having a wonderful time with their skeleton painted faces. And in the next slide, we see the young people, the young girls comparing notes on their makeup, their dresses, and dancing with their partners on the right-hand side here. And I'm not sure if we've come to the role of ritual in coming to terms with death. So let's talk about that. I know that we just have about 10 minutes left, and please, again, if you include in the comments some things that you would like shared, I will put that together in a document and have it available for people. So make a note to me personally in your comments, and I will be sure to try and include that. But I think thinking about private rituals is important in the time of loss, especially when public rituals aren't available. the question came up during our last talk on grief of how you can help children. And one of the things that helped my nephews after the loss of their grandfather and their aunt, who they were very close to, all of these losses were happening, is we created our own little ritual for Hanal Pishan, in which we cooked a meal. We cooked apple pie for my father and one of my sister's favorite dishes. And we put a place out for them at the table and put their food out for them. And my nephews helped me cook. And I think it kind of helped. They were grounded. I think it's really important to find a way to be grounded, to regain your footing and to connect around something important. And in my family, that always includes food. But I'm wondering, are there other thoughts to add to this? I know that there are things that have been very much missed in India in terms of any kind of a funeral. Forgive me, I got to turn off my phone here. In terms of the funeral rituals and all of the things that kind of keep us organized and keep us grounded. And I think it's really important to reach out and to find ways of recreating some of that. Rituals.
There are ceremonies to honor ancestors that I know that people in my family do. On a particular day of the year, it's like a day for the ancestors. So there are certain rituals and ceremonies for that that happen every year. But it's different because India is so big and diverse. Different communities have different traditions. I know a lot of families have pictures of their parents or their ancestors, and they light incense at an altar. Some families do that, and they offer food also.
Yes. Yeah. There is some common human tendency to want to share. And certainly I did what I called my ancestor altar in my home. My father died. Being an American, I tend to have to borrow from other traditions because we are not as rooted. But I did create an altar for my father with his reading glasses and a letter he wrote me and some photographs and a candle. So I really feel that.
We have someone who put in the chat that their mother cooks the person who's passed their favorite food and distributes them to the local pundits. So the local, like, I guess, priests would be the translation probably.
Yeah. Yes.
Priests and sages and learned ones. So people of God, basically, but hopefully, usually people of God.
Yes. Yes. And that's, I think, an example of kind of trying to face in the right direction as you're going through all of this. You're offering food to people who are spiritual guides. It helps you face in a particular direction. And I remember a point in, being a psychologist, I had my own therapist for many years, working through all of these things that I hope would be cured by going to psychology school, but I was still dealing with. And I remember saying to her at some point that I realized my goal in life was to die facing in the right direction. And I think that that's, kind of what we're trying to get at here is what helps you continue on in the right direction, even when you're walking through, as they say in the Christian tradition, when you're going through the valley of death, when you're going through the valley of darkness. I think as long as you can keep yourself facing in the right direction, and that can include constructing rituals, then you'll end up where you need to be. And I see somebody mentions that children who are far away from family are grieving virtually and have devised digital rituals, which I think is a wonderful thing. I mean, our very coming together today is an example of this technology, which, I grew up before computers were invented. So I'm always amazed by what we are able to do and ways that we are able to connect. And even though it may not be as good as sitting in a room with someone, it really is a very important connection. and it can carry us through a lot.
We have some more sharing. One person wants to ask, what is the best way to construct virtual rituals? Another person is sharing that they donate food and clothes to less privileged people on the birthdays and of the ones passed away in the family. Another person said, in the Christian Kerala community, every year on the day of the person's death, having a holy mass, incense prayer, and the two-man feast afterwards. So like coming together, honoring prayer. Yeah. So then these are the sharings, and then we have a question about how to construct virtual rituals in a time where maybe this isn't so possible. But I appreciate everyone sharing.
I would like to think.
Go ahead.
The thing is that I started an organization called Bani Communications. My mother, I lost her in the year 2000. And she was very good as a linguist. She could speak a few languages, 3 to 4 to 5, South Indian, North Indian, as well as Bengali and English and Hindi. So I started an organization called Bani Communications, and it is almost 15 years I've been working, and I feel my mother beside me. That is one. And number two, I would like to state that I lost my father 2 years back, and he was a very, very dynamic man. And for him, what I did was I tried to keep the memories, whatever I spent with my time, I spent with my father in digital form. And I still feel that he's beside me every moment. So I would request all of us to have more digital photographs and interviews and live sessions and recordings so that they can help us to graze through difficult times when we are passing them.
That's a wonderful observation. I remember listening to my sister's voicemail messages for months after she passed away. And, and I created a slideshow of my.
Nancy, I muted you.
Nancy, you were muted.
Somebody muted me.
that would be me. I was trying to unmute DN College, who had raised his hand, but then you disappeared and I muted you by mistake. I'm so sorry.
That's
quite unmute somebody, but I muted you. So we had someone who raised their hand. DN College, if you're still here, if you wanted to say something. I know you had asked
Hello.
questions. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Hello, everyone. My name is Shashank Mishra. I'm an assistant professor in psychology here in Daudnagar, Bihar. So right now, somebody mentioned that the lady mentioned that you should have more pictures. The presence should be more on the digital platform. I just wanted to ask if we are continuing with the kind of digital data that we are creating, grieving somebody on the digital platform. Is it pathological in some way? Because grieving is supposed to get you through a process of intense loss. And after the period, isn't it supposed to you are supposed to overcome it and not continue with that bond? Though that bond in many cultures do exist and people transform it in a very different sense, like Italian Americans do with their deceased whom they have lost already. But is it pathological in some way?
That's an excellent question. And I think the way to assess that is whether the person is not just remembering the lost loved one, but also moving on in their life. I think that there's a difference between grieving someone and missing someone. I remember in the acute phases of grief, it was very hard to think about my sister. It felt, disorganizing. It made me not want to have to do my taxes, for example. I didn't want to have to bother with that stuff. But now I can think of her and the things we shared, the meals we cooked together, and I still remember her, but I'm not grieving for her. And I think as long as you are able, whatever you are doing, if whatever you are doing is helping you move forward, then that's how we judge whether it's pathological, whether a person is able to remain open to the future, even as they are moving on from the past.
I would like to add here one thing. May I? So that thing is, as the gentleman said, definitely grief is there, but as the Bhagavad Gita says, life continues and the soul continues its journey. So keeping that perspective, what are the good points which we like to carry forward in our life of the person deceased is extremely important in the long run, 5 or 3-4 years down the line. Maybe the grief we may be able to overcome, but if we forget the person's good qualities if we see the person again and again, I think we are able to at least I feel we are able to overcome the grief and carry the memory of the person as long as we live, which is extremely important, at least for me. I feel my father beside me, guiding me in everything that I do. So that feeling is very important for me.
That's a wonderful observation. And I think perhaps a good one to wrap it up on, being able to live a life that incorporates the best of that person and the best of that relationship as you move forward into the future is incredibly important. And I think with all of this, with everything we're going through with the pandemic and the losses, sometimes it's useful to think, 5 years from now, how do I want to look back on this? Where do I want to be? We can kind of remember that the future is waiting for us, and it's up to us to make sure we're approaching it in the right direction. So,
Nancy,
Diksha,
we have 2 more questions. Do you want to respond to them via email, or do you want to take them now?
Let me see. Are they brief? It's hard to tell.
One of them is so Mega chatted her question to me, so I can read that out. And then Simmerpreet raised her hand. Or raised their hand. So whatever you think, we can also respond via email if you think that's better.
I'll tell you what, because we're already over time a little bit, and I do know there are some people today who have things they need to get to, please let me, my email should be on one of the slides at the end. Email.
Then Mehboob also had a question. Let me just type in your email in the chat.
Okay, yes. Please send me questions, and I am going to try to summarize some of the suggestions that have been made today because they are really wonderful suggestions. And I think this is how we get through this. We get through this together. We get through this sharing things in any way that we can, including on Zoom. So I want to thank you all for being here today. And Diksha, thank you for doing a wonderful job kind of dealing with the mishaps in technology and making it work.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was an honor to be with you. And everyone, please take good care of yourselves during this difficult. You're not alone. We're thinking of you.
Thank you, ma'am. It was very mind-blowing. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, everybody. Diksha, are you going to close the meeting?
I don't think I have that capability.
I'm not sure
I'm just a co-host.
Yeah. So
I think Dr. Singh has that capability.
Yes.
Hello. So should we end now?
Yes, let's wrap it up now and invite people. You can send me some questions if you have more.
Yeah, in case anybody has more question, you can ask. Otherwise, we can end here.
We can end here, yes. And please feel free to email me.
The emails are
I
there.
have one more question.
Okay.
Could you please suggest
please.
names of some books for